Here we are. I'm just going to pop in and see and make sure all is well in the Facebook world. Samantha Long is live. Hey, guys. So if you're popping on, I would love for you to send me a hello in the comments. I'm recording a live solo episode of Self-Care is My Job. And for anybody who's popping on or replaying this who hasn't listened or followed me previously, I'm Samantha Long, and I'm a yoga instructor and a self-care mentor for moms. Self-care coach for women specifically because I get it. And this month in May has been the month of mother, the month of motherhood, or the month of mom. And I have been focusing and having really interesting and deep conversations around topics that really only affect mothers. And there's a lot of course, gray area where it's like it doesn't matter in some cases if you have children or not. As a woman, we really all do face a lot of the same expectations as a nurturer, as a caregiver, as a supporter, which really does affect our ability to prioritize our own self-care. So just putting that out there. And as I begin this episode of Self-Care is My Job, this solo episode, I just want to put out there a couple things. I know that it might seem that I have this, serene little peaceful area that may or may not be big, small, whatever. And I record here right on my yoga mat as often as I can, at least when I do these live recordings for the show. But just so everyone is aware, right behind this computer that I'm staring at is my washer and dryer. That's where I am, directly across in my basement, directly across from my washer and dryer, right where I belong, right? And right before I popped on, my son was screaming his head off, who's 2.5 years old, screaming his head off because mommy was going downstairs without him. And it tore my fucking heart apart. Not the first time that he's done it, obviously. This happens several times a week where he, couldn't be bothered with me, was perfectly content playing with pots and pans right before me attempting to come downstairs on my own. But of course, the moment that even enters the realm of possibilities, loses his mind. And again, happens several times a week, if not several times a day. It still rips my heart out every fucking time. I also just found a gray hair before I came down here. It didn't set me up in a nice way. But I'm just putting that out there as far as much work as I have done in the space of cultivating just that, right? Space in my life to either remain space, lightness, openness, silence, whatever it is, alone time, whatever it is, or to fill that space with something that makes me feel really good, some form of self-care that is going to support me physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. As much work as I have done to normalize that in my life and hopefully in others' lives as well, I still experience mom guilt. It's just a matter of whether or not I can move through it, whether I can move through that arc of emotion and understand why it's there, and then feel any emotions that are attached to that recurring thought pattern, to that reaction, and then continue on, right? And on some days that are my more, stressful or sensitive days, maybe it's harder and maybe there are tears and maybe there's an actual reaction to it. And on other days, I have a much easier time, right? And the more I practice that, the easier it gets to move beyond that emotion. So I'm putting that out there only because I know that mom guilt is a major, major thing for most moms. So I just concluded a self-care for moms workshop last week. And I just want to thank for if they're listening at any point, I just want to thank the women who joined me because it was a beautiful experience. We touched on so many things. We talked about what is self-care, what self-care isn't. We talked about mom guilt. We talked about ways of prioritizing yourself as a mother, specific key forms of self-care for mothers that are so necessary. And again, for those of you who haven't joined me previously on on an episode or on a live, when I talk about self-care for my own, message about self-care, I'm not talking about bubble baths and pedicures, and I'm certainly not talking about having a glass of wine, and I'm certainly not talking about all of the things that society likes to portray as self-care and market specifically to women. I am talking about real ways that should cost you absolutely nothing, that you can support yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and even energetically. Um, so whether that is, working out or something related to diet, whether that is meditation or whether it's yoga, whether it's journaling, or whether you just need space and quiet. Um, or you can get deeper and deeper into what self-care means for you. And sometimes we get disconnected and we don't even know what the hell we need. And that's where a mindfulness or a presence practice really comes into play, which is why I really like to bring yoga and meditation and breath work into my coaching practice, because it's the way that we get out of our head into our body and we can start to look at things as a witness and become self-aware so that we can really, really see what's going on and what do I really need? Do I need a glass of wine right now, or do I need to write some fucking thoughts down and get some stuff on paper? Do I need to address the elephant in the room? The thing that I've been ignoring. So self-care in many cases can be self-soothing, right? Like I need a bath. Like baths are, and things like that. Um or do I need, to call a friend, ways in which we soothe ourselves specifically in times of stress. Sure, self-care can be considered and it's inclusive of that, whatever that self-soothing practice is that you have. It could be a few different things that work for you in those moments, but it's also about self-preservation. So the things that we rely on as a practice, as a routine, something that that we can maintain as a practice so that we can control our wellness. We can take back control of our own wellness and we can show up fully and open-heartedly and to our best potential instead of exhausted and depleted and depressed and even bitter and resentful, because a lot of that comes into play. That resentment, that bitterness comes into play when we are constantly trying to fulfill these expectations of the world, of our family, of our parents, of our partner, of our children. And we're operating from an empty space. We got nothing left. But yet these expectations are still there. And then we become angry, resentful, and bitter about their existence. So then we become a victim, right? An angry, resentful victim of our situation. And the key, and why I'm getting into all of this, is that especially as mothers who have such a hard time with um, physical obstacles in our way, like time and childcare and things like that, and then limiting beliefs as far as obstacles, like the belief that we're supposed to sacrifice ourselves over ourselves for our children and their well-being and their happiness and their entertainment. So we have these blocks. And the funny thing is that as mothers, the way to navigate these blocks is self-care. So, the way to navigate the blocks between you and your self-care is to jump into self-care, which is why I'm talking about how self-care isn't just bubble baths and pedicures. It could mean addressing the elephant in the room, which could mean talking to your partner about needing more support, which can be a hard conversation sometimes. Or it could mean saying no and setting boundaries so that you can create space in your life for anything else, for what you need. So, what I would love to do, and again, if you're joining me live and you're here with me, I think you can give StreamYard permission to send the comments over to me, but I might just actually pop on Facebook and just see if anybody, is with me here. So, hey. So, I'd like to do a couple things. I want to just talk quickly, just to, like for anybody who's here and hasn't heard my story yet and wants to get to know me a little bit more, I just want to tell you a little bit about my motherhood journey. And what I wrote down here was a few things. I'm going to take you into, and none of this is definitive, by the way. I always keep saying that, right? Like, my experience is different from your experience. So if you are listening to this and you feel like something resonates, then please do tell. But if you feel like, you know what, I actually had luck doing it this way, or, whatever it might be, I am all ears. But from my own perspective, I'm going to share 5 mentality shifts, 5 mom mentality shifts that really were fucking game changers for me. And I'm also going to share the 5 key forms of self-care for mothers. There are also, coincidentally, 5 key blocks that I found were most prominent after doing this self-care for moms workshop. And I love when things are synchronous in that way, because it means the universe is saying I'm on the right track. And there are a couple things. So, my motherhood journey began rocky as hell because a month before I was due with my first child, my daughter, who's now almost 6, the company I was working for laid me off. I was part of a round of 17 other people who got laid off that day. I was in the publishing industry for a little over 10 years at that point, and I had what I considered my dream job. But I was there for a short amount of time before getting pregnant, and clearly didn't solidify my my stake in the company before having to tell everybody that I was pregnant, and promptly put myself on the chopping block for that round of layoffs because I was ready to go on maternity leave. So I know for a fact that that is part of why I was on that list, right? Maybe not the entire reason, but definitely part of it. And I still have regrets to this day about not making a really big stink and taking this company to court and doing the whole thing. Just knowing also the details that come along with it, make it very, very clear that, I was on the list of being let go mostly because I was about to take maternity leave and was going to have other priorities besides the job. Talked to 3 lawyers, had it pretty much, confirmed that I had a case. But I I don't want to say I was fortunate, because nothing in that moment seemed fortunate. And I was totally blindsided, by the way. So imagine, putting really, my entire identity really being wrapped up in that career, because obviously didn't have children yet. So things do shift, of course, where your identity is very much tethered to motherhood after you have children. But um before that, for many women, it's about your job, and it's or in it or having fun and dating and the whole thing, right? So when that job and that career was taken away from me, and obviously, you don't I mean, I actually did go on some interviews at 8 months pregnant trying to maintain my career, but that obviously wasn't gonna work out, and it's also really, really hard to secure a new job after the baby was born and having a newborn. So, that was the end of my publishing career, and I didn't actually know it at the time, but things started to shift really quickly after that. There were some good things that happened, some bad things that happened. Obviously, as I said, I was having somewhat of an identity crisis because I had to adjust to becoming a mother at the same time as um, that severing of me and that personality, that massive part of my personality, which was career woman, right? Which was publisher, which was salesperson, which was all around the job. And I was proud of that too, I have to say. I was really proud of my career and how far I had come. But there was also something that happened, which was an understanding that that job and the title and the salary and the importance of being in the meetings and doing the projects and being charge of the tasks and all of it, the importance of all of that was validating me very, very much, validating my existence, making me feel enough. So when that piece was taken away from me at the same time as coming into this very different world of motherhood, I did not feel enough. I didn't know it was happening at the time, but I did not feel like I was contributing enough to my family, to my society, to everything because we're brought up, right? Like women nowadays are brought up to be told you could have it all. Having it all is really, really hard. Having the mother load, as we talk about, which is basically like the mental load of motherhood plus a full-time job is a lot. And I just want to be clear here too that I've now, like I've done both stay-at-home mom and working mom and in between. I've done it all. And none of it friggin' matters because if you're a stay-at-home mom, your full-time job is doing all the motherly duties. Not that you don't when you're a working mom, you have all the motherly duties, but you're not doing them throughout the entire day. You're doing your other work duties while somebody else, in most cases, is caring for your children and they're taking on those duties. So either way, I'm just putting it out there because I've given it a lot of thought and because there's also something to be said. I always find it very, very important to make sure that as women, we're very much conditioned and programmed to compete with each other. So there is a space, I think, in society now where women are still competing as far as who has the harder job, the stay-at-home moms and the working moms. And I just, always find it really necessary to put it out there that nobody has it harder. It's just fucking hard. Either way. So, you could probably hear my son crying once again, tearing on my heartstrings. So, as I continue in my motherhood journey, I have tons of postpartum anxiety. And a lot of that was because I started to try to make motherhood my full-time job. I started to make motherhood like my perfection baby. Like how much of my perfectionism and anxiety went into making sure everything went just so with my corporate job, that anxiety and perfectionism I poured into motherhood and I tried to make it perfect. And I also took on more and more projects outside of just my motherly duties because why? Because I was trying to validate myself. Because what happens is we're told as women that when we have, and I'm sure that women who don't intend to have children probably get quite pissed off about this because we're told that motherhood and becoming a mother and having kids is going to fulfill you. It's going to be like the ultimate place of fulfillment is when you have the kids. But that's a crock of shit. That is a crock of shit. Okay. Because Fulfillment needs to come from within yourself. And so that is a key factor that I think needs to be flipped around and discussed so much more, is that first of all, it's okay to vocalize it if you don't feel fulfilled by motherhood, because there are some women who wouldn't dare even say that out loud, and I'm normalizing it here and there, here and now. But also the idea that we need to normalize and bring awareness to the idea that fulfillment comes from within you. Happiness comes from within you. We cannot put the pressure of our fulfillment and our happiness on our children, because your children are their own person with their own wants, desires, energy, with their own soul, their own spirit, their own ideas. They're not little yous walking around. So if we put all of our eggs into that basket where we are deciding that the way our kids are, whether that, like putting all of our efforts into making our children these perfect angels of people, right? Like they're groomed perfectly, they're dressed perfectly, they're super smart, they're doing all the things. There's a smile on their face all the time, and now you're fulfilled by that. Well, guess what? First of all, that's really hard to maintain. So if we hang our hat on that as far as fulfillment and happiness, I think we're in trouble. And it won't work. It won't work because your children are their own people, and you can't control for their entire lives whether they're happy or sad, or whether they look good or look messy or whatever. We can't put that kind of pressure on it. So this brings me to these mentality shifts that I think, which these, by the way, weren't even included in that self-care for moms workshop that we just did, because I just downloaded them but a day ago. So the first one is just exactly what we were just talking about. The fact that we're not sculptors. We're not artists over here trying to sculpt the perfect masterpiece of a person when we're mothering, when we're parenting in general, right? We're not over here with the pressure of chiseling out by all of our efforts this perfect masterpiece. That is not mothering. That is not parenting. That's controlling. We really have to embrace the fact that your children are, again, they're their own little souls walking around, and we can guide and we can model is what we can do. So the way that nurture works, right? You have nature, which is the part of it that we can't control at all, right? Like that's just inherited. And then you have nurture. And the way that nurture works mostly is that a child is going to mirror everything they see and hear and feel. So the best possible way for us to set our children up for success is to model what it is to take control of your own happiness and fulfillment. Instead of so you're giving them the control instead of trying to control how they look, feel, and act. The reason that this is huge is, one, it's for the benefit of the child, right? To have their own life to live and not be controlled and not be over guided, like, that helicopter parenting, that hovering, that intense control. But also it takes the pressure off of us as the mother. When I mean, if you're listening to this and you're like, well, duh, Sam, like, of course, then you can say that to me. And if you're listening to this and you're like, whoa, like, I'm with you, because I don't think that I fully understood, really, really, really was able to embrace this concept of like, whoa, like I don't have all the control until I think one of my yoga teachers in my yoga teacher training, I don't remember her exact words, but we were talking about motherhood and this is what came out. And because I had so much respect and like adoration for her, like there was this connection, and it was the way that it came out of her and landed on me, and it was like a light bulb went off, and I literally felt a lightness in my body start to cultivate, because it was this release of a responsibility, that like I didn't want, because up until that point, and still I face this, right? I was so scared of fucking up my kids. So very scared. Which leads me to our next one. Next mom mentality shift that I thought was huge. This is mindset stuff, actually. Growth mindset. So just as a general, you have mindset versus fixed mindset. And a growth mindset says, I can make mistakes and I can learn from them, and I will grow from making those mistakes and learning lessons from those mistakes, bottom line. So I don't have to fear judgment and I don't have to fear failure, because as soon as I put something into action, even if it's a disaster or a success or somewhere in between, either way, I will learn, I will grow, and I don't have to fear failure or judgment because of that. And a fixed mindset says, I am just the way that I am. I'm only good at the things I'm good at, and I'm only good in these areas, and I suck in these areas, and that's just it. And that's it. It is what it is type of approach. And don't get me wrong, there's a time and a place for that phrase, it is what it is. I really do think so, but it's not. It shouldn't be in our mindset, because our mindset, it shouldn't be in our area and capacity to grow. It's not an is what it is situation. So how does this translate to parenting? Is that you will fuck up. You will yell at your kids. You will curse in front of your kids. You will um, model shitty behavior. You will pass judgment on someone in front of them. You will fuck up in parenting. And we need to embrace a growth mindset around this, which is every time you're going to be triggered, you're going to feel it in your body every time that happens, because you're going to go, fuck, I'm messing up my kids. And it's going to feel terrible. And I was in that place for so long. I mean, every day. And, in therapy, I would write down thought patterns, like recurring thought patterns, and I was just blown away by how many of them were fearful around messing up my kids, causing some mental and emotional trauma to them by not being the best, by not being a perfect parent, pretty much. So there was so much fear. And the thing also to remember about, that growth mindset as a parent is to realize this is your first time. This is your first time parenting in this lifetime, at least, right? You know, as mothers specifically women, there is something to be said about our natural gift of nurturing, right? And as somebody who talks a lot about feminine energy and the divine feminine and our feminine gifts, yeah, absolutely, that is a feminine gift. Our ability to nurture and to parent and to guide. However, in this lifetime, on this earth and in this space, And in the human form that you are in right now, this is your first time doing this. So cut yourself a damn break. Because even if it's your second child or your third child, that, once again, that child is a different human than the first one and the second one and whoever came before them. So it is your first time parenting that soul, that tiny soul with those needs and those desires and that energy and that heart. So cut yourself a break, because as much as, it's like, okay, here's the badge of mom. You got it now, right? It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. This is your first time doing this. And it's also important to normalize that conversation with your children. Like when you do make mistakes, talk about it. You know what? Mommy really messed up. And I should have done this. Now that I think about it, I really should have done this. And I'm sorry. Or whatever it might be. Moving on. So a lot of people have probably heard the concept of generational trauma be discussed, right? It's like striking fear into the hearts of parents all over the world. Because of that same reason, right? That fear of fucking up your kids and passing on the pain. Okay? And so obviously, and this is another one, a separate shift that we'll talk about, but obviously the answer to that, right, is to heal yourself. Heal the mother, heal the child, heal the world. It starts with you. Pain is passed on. Trauma is passed on. The reason that generational trauma exists, there are a few reasons, because sometimes it really is like an actual, it's hard for me to understand actually sometimes too, because I'm no scientist, but there is, definitely evidence that proves that there is an actual DNA transition, right? For that trauma to be passed on, in a hereditary type of way. But mostly it's through that nurturing space, that mirroring. So children will mirror, and we pick up patterns not only in our body, but in the way that you react to triggers and certain situations. So when trauma happens, whether it's a disaster or something less intense but repetitive, there is a trauma response. And that trauma response will repeat and repeat and repeat every time it's triggered. And not to get too deep into this conversation, but a child will mirror those trauma responses that they see in their parents. So the two top ways, the two most important ways to heal generational trauma, or to break the cycle, as we say, is A, to have open communication about it, which is something that is hard for people, open, vulnerable conversation about the past, about the things that happened, the hard things and our feelings. If you're watching this and you are either one of these people or have family members who are one of these people who have a really hard time talking about their feelings, or if you're like me and almost never had a space for most of my life, never had a space for allowing all of these emotions to be vocalized without judgment. Um, there's a lot of them because I'm an empath and a highly sensitive person. So there's a lot of feelings, a lot of energy. And so if you're with me, that's why I talk about this open communication and about the importance of normalizing speaking truth and normalizing vulnerable conversations in your family is a part of breaking the cycle of generational trauma. The other piece is, again, to heal yourself. So when I talk about self-care, again, many times I'm talking about spiritual self-care, addressing the elephant in the room, healing yourself of the shit that is weighing you down. And sometimes we don't know what specifically it is, but there are support systems available to you to get down in it and figure it out, like working with a coach like me or working with a therapist, or even simply incorporating a meditation practice or incorporating another form of emotional regulation, right? That will allow you to have a mindfulness and a presence practice so that you can learn to slow down and ask yourself what's going on when you're triggered. So I won't go too much further in that. I just want to say hi to Ankara Rose, who just joined me. Thank you for being here. Um, so we already talked about healing yourself in order to heal your children. And then the other piece, right? Breaking the cycle. So we break the cycle of that generational trauma. So, and I call this a mentality shift for mothers, because once you are aware, you have that self-awareness that this is a thing, then the value of prioritizing your wellness and healing becomes apparent to you as a mother, because you realize that it's not just about the things that you say and do with your children that will set them up for success in life. It's about what you say and do to and for yourself. And the last mom mentality shift that I need to mention is the idea of being a model, not a martyr. A model instead of a martyr. And this quote or passage comes from, I wish that I actually thought about bringing the book down, but comes from a book called Untamed by Glennon Doyle. So look it up. It's like a motherhood Bible as far as the concept of living your life on your own terms, first of all, because there's just sort of that general idea, right? Um, living life on your own terms, but specifically living motherhood on your own terms. Writing your own story of motherhood and what it looks like for you. There's a massive connection between self-care and motherhood just in that. Because a lot of times, what is holding us back from prioritizing our own wellness as mothers are the expectations of society, the um, the fear of judgment when we step out of those expectations. So one of the expectations, to be super general about it for the time being, is that a mother is supposed to do everything for her children first before she can do anything for herself. Or that a mother is supposed to legit be like self-sacrificing completely and subservient to not only her partner but her children as well. There are now the roles, as far as gender roles and, household roles, we've come a long way in many households, I think. But this is where that generational trauma comes in and that mother wound comes in, which we just had an episode released yesterday about this. So go check that out. Episode from yesterday was about the mother wound. But there are pieces passed down from mother to daughter in many cases that it doesn't matter if society has evolved, you still have this embedded um, tendency to sacrifice yourself, for example, for the greater good of the family. And what happens is we make it look so freaking easy because we keep that smile on our face and we just keep going instead of asking for help or saying no or wait or later or whatever it might be. And sometimes we do that for so long that we end up hitting a wall and freaking out and getting really angry. And that's where, that bitterness and resentment that I talked about in the beginning of the episode. So we have to remember that once again, we are modeling for our children so that when we prioritize our self-care Not only are we filling our own cup, right, so that we can show up for them wholeheartedly and well, which really is a thing. Try it, it'll work. But we're also modeling for them what it looks like to take control of our own wellness and not depend on the outside world or on our partner or on them, your children, or whatever it is for fulfillment and happiness. So it is literally the greatest gift that you could possibly give your children is to have them mirror you prioritizing yourself. And they'll never have not to say definitively they'll never have a worry in their whole life. No. Um, but they'll have that sense of empowerment. Also, we don't, so when we decide to not be the martyr, the woman who prioritizes everybody else and is therefore bitter and angry and depleted about it, chip on the shoulder, right? We don't need to be the martyr about it because we absolutely, especially in this day and age, we can release those old patterns and decide to actively do motherhood on our own terms. We just need to restructure some things. And we also need to have some important, vulnerable conversations about it and start having forums for not only women discussing with women all of these, just like the Self-Care for Moms workshop that I just concluded, but also open communication with your partner, with your family, with people who can support you to make these shifts. So those are the 5 mom mentality shifts that I wanted to mention because all of them were a part of my story, of my evolution in motherhood, and I'm still in it. Because like I said, I still have these moments where I am, you know, near tears because my son is screaming as I'm walking down the stairs to do this. But even though this is a solo episode, this is a part of self-care for me. This is the moment where I get to say all the things that I was judged for saying for a long time, which I mentioned before, right? Like those conversations about truth that I was judged for initiating for most of my life. So this is self-care in that way for me. And I choose to have this be a part of my journey and of my message and my purpose. So I think it's important to name the culprit, right? So obviously it's easier said than done to prioritize yourself as a mother. And it became really apparent that, as suspected, there are some very key ways in which we either hold ourselves back from prioritizing our wellness and from having self-care practices and from doing things for ourselves as mothers, or we have actual physical, tangible obstacles in our way. Sometimes we just don't have the energy. And I don't only mean energy as far as stamina and whether we're tired or depleted or exhausted. I mean the actual energetic space for it. And the reason for that is either A, yes, we're exhausted because we have too much on our plate, way too much on our plate, and we need to take some shit off our plate, give and create space for ourselves. And the other part are what I generally refer to as vampires, energy vampires. So your children can absolutely be energy vampires, but they're not going anywhere. You can set boundaries with your children and you can tell them to wait, or you can say no, or you can ask for support so that you can create space between you and your children. But there are other people, especially other people in a woman's life, because we have this gift of nurturing and support. There are other, and we're the natural caregivers. So there are other people in a woman's life who are energy vampires. whether they mean to be or not saying it's malicious or it's intentionally screwing with you. But you have other people who are sucking you dry. And that's where we need to start drawing some boundaries. So other blocks can be just simple time management, like fitting it in. Childcare is huge, which obviously most of the time falls on the women as the the women are responsible for organizing the childcare. There's a lot that we went into in this Self-Care for Moms workshop that was so important to like actually vocalize all of these things that are in our way. And another part of it was judgment. So that's going back to the idea that as women, we have expectations, that we have a whole list of expectations that are set up for us as women in this patriarchal society that we live in that are simply that simply don't apply to men. And this is not to sit and have a bitch session about how men have it easy and yada yada yada. It's not productive to go down that road. It's really not. It is a space of deciding, therefore, that if this extra list of expectations exist and they do not fit into your idea, your ideal of what motherhood should and could look like for you, then taking control of making changes to get to that space, to actively live life on your own terms, taking back your control. I want to talk quickly about what happens when a mother prioritizes herself. I'm looking at my phone for a moment because this was a part of my presentation and I liked the way that I wrote some of it down. What happens when a mother prioritizes her wellness and or heals herself? First of all, they feel less depleted and can show up more authentically and be more present. So I want to give an example of how this looked in my life. After lots of yoga and not as much, but a lot of meditation and a lot of breath work, okay? I finally got to a place where I could say I had a really solid presence practice. And what I mean by that is where I could actually be in the now and really enjoy and embrace what was going on presently. And most importantly, to slow down. The ability to slow down and pause and even rest, right? So that, because what happens is we have a lot of, as women in this current society, we have a lot of overexpressed masculine. So it's like the idea that tendency to always be doing, going more, more, more. And so we lose that space, that feminine draw of like space and openness and actually like being in the moment, feeling your feelings, internalizing, processing. So we lose that, which on one hand really messes with our emotional capacity. And our ability to regulate our emotions so that we don't end up blowing up on our kids, et cetera, et cetera. But when we're able to cultivate a presence practice, we can slow down. And that means that we can be, so for me, the way that when the light bulb really went on as far as the value of that was when I finally got really capable of being present with my kids. And I wish it didn't take me that long to get that. But again, for me specifically, it was because of this overexpressed masculine from not only the society we live in, but from working corporate for over 10 years, the anxiety of always, going over things a million times, making sure everything was perfect, always needing to to exceed a previous goal and the next goal and the next goal, doing more and more and more. Always moving, always going. It doesn't it does not help our ability to be present. So that's what I mean by showing up more authentically and more present, and not only for your kids, but for everyone in your life and for every situation. We want to live our lives fully and live it authentically, meaning being yourself and not trying to put on this facade of perfection, of perfect kids, perfect mom, perfect house, the white picket fence, right? No, no, no. Showing up authentically and confidently. These are the things that happen when a mother prioritizes her wellness. They feel less resentful and bitter about the overwhelming mother load of responsibilities. The mother load is a friggin' thing. We're responsible for, in many cases, not every case, but in many cases, we are responsible for the mental load of all of the things, the parties, the planning, the securing childcare, the transportation, the purchasing, the groceries, the meals, the cooking, the cleaning. There's so many things that tend to fall. Now, ideally, we have support. Ideally, we have a partner that support us. There's a lot of single parents who don't have that. Uh, Ideally, we have family members or friends. We talk about the concept of it takes a village. There was a time and a place where there was that village where like your whole freaking neighborhood would come together and everybody would be outside helping each other with everybody's kids and stuff. That doesn't exist anymore. It sucks, but it really doesn't exist anymore. So support um, is really lacking in a lot of areas, which ends up making us feel a lot of times resentful and bitter about this mother load of responsibilities. But when we decide actively that mother load, first of all, we use self-care to navigate that by setting boundaries, by saying no, by asking for the support that we need. And because of a vibrational shift that happens when we start to prioritize our own self-care, we don't have to attach ourselves to that bitterness and resentment and those negative emotions anymore. We move into a new space. They are modeling for their children what it means to take control of your own life, wellness, and happiness, which we talked about. It's huge. Your children will then mirror what they are seeing you do. It's just the same way you could take the simplest example, right? If your child sees you work out. Now, I tend to not, stay in the space of physical self-care very much because I don't always feel like that's, it depends on the person and the situation in your life. What do you actually need as far as your self-care? What is really going to do the trick for you? But say it's working out. If your child, I mean, it's a simple example. If your child watches you work out a few times a week their whole life, they're going to mirror that. They're going to know that that's like a thing. And eventually they're going to feel comfortable incorporating that into their life. If they never watch you do any of that, it won't be a thing. Not to say that that's like, sentencing them to never being able to take care of their health. I've never once watched my mother work out or my father. I don't think I did. Another thing that happens when a mother prioritizes her wellness, they dismantle the patriarchal program of subservience and self-sacrifice. When we actively choose to mother and live our life of motherhood on our own terms, we don't have to follow this yellow brick road that society has paved. We don't have to. We step out of victimhood and martyrdom and into our inner knowing and power. So, this is huge because when we're in that space of victimhood and martyrdom, It's like, poor me. Why are these expectations? Why do I have to deal with all this shit? Why is it always me? And again, I have been there. I understand the frustration because that mother load is a lot. It's too much, to be honest. Um, but when we can jump in and shift, we start to then see the value of self-care and prioritizing ourselves in any way. Like, I don't care if it's a night out with your girls, like, you will see the value because there will be a change in the way that you feel. Your vibration, your frequency will change by drawing more of what you love and what you need and what's good for you into your life. When that happens, you send a message of self-love and self-trust inward. You send a message to your soul that you matter by prioritizing yourself. There is no better way to heal than to send that message internally. So when that happens, you feel more self-trust because you can rely on yourself. And self-trust equals inner knowing. It equals an enhanced amount of intuition. And that translates again to confidence and living authentically and wholeheartedly. There are so many things, you guys. So, very quickly, I want to share from the Self-Care for Moms workshop that concluded last week. There are 5 key forms of self-care for mothers. Again, not definitive. There are lots of forms of self-care, and if you're interested in an entire list and even a workbook that is going to guide you to create a self-care toolbox for yourself as a mother, then contact me because I'm putting all of these pieces together in a bundle from the Self-Care for Moms workshop that is going to be available for purchase. The first 2 sessions of the workshop were recorded. Those recordings are going to be included only for paying participants, paying clients. None of that information is going to be shared publicly. Plus the workbook, plus journal prompts, plus a mindfulness meditation, all in one bundle. And that's going to be available within the next couple of days for purchase. If you are interested in, and you couldn't join the workshop live, I am going to be doing it again, I think, in the fall. But I am going to be offering the bundle very shortly. So this was part of that, the 5 forms of self-care, key forms of self-care for moms, the 5 S's, if you will. Space. The first one is space. Not necessarily space as far as creating space in your life by saying no and setting boundaries, because that's a different one. But space that you just leave as space, as that. Not space for you to fill with more to-dos, and not space for you to fill with more productivity, and not space for you to even fill with more self-care. But physical space from your children, cultivating that for yourself in some way, which again is going to require other forms of self-care to have that set up for you. But space, silence, quiet, that could obviously be, like also 2 for 1, taking a bath, and having that quiet time. But sometimes having that, like, bath at the end of the night, like, it might not be enough because you're already that's your time, ideally, like, after the kids go to bed, if your kids are young, like, that's your time to do something, and that's great. But then don't fill it with all these other things that you have to do. Straight up space. The reason that it's important is because it will allow you, whether you meditate during that time or whether you sit and fill it however you need to fill it, but not with a lot of doing. Allow yourself to be still and allow yourself to have that space and time to come back to yourself, to remember yourself. Because we completely lose ourselves sometimes in motherhood, in all of those responsibilities, and also with like the identity where we are so tethered to our children and to the ego of motherhood, right? To the persona of motherhood, like then that we wear that and that's who we are. But like who were we before motherhood? Who were we always? Um Another form of self-care that's super important is support. And when you need support, you have to ask for it. Asking you shall receive. Try it. That's your homework. Your homework is either to do one of two things, to either ask for support to cultivate some time for whatever self-care practice you think you need most. And again, if you need some help to get in touch with what that might be for you, please do reach out to me. The homework is one of these two forms of self-care that will help you navigate what's between you and self-care, asking for support or setting boundaries. So what you need to do is either ask for support from either your partner, a family member, a friend to take over something, take over for your kids, take over some of your responsibilities or any kind of support that you might need to have that time. Or you need to set a boundary or say no. They're the same thing. Saying no is hard for mothers. And that's why we have to try anyway. We have to kind of get into that discomfort just for a moment so that we can see the value of what it actually does for us on the other side. Spirituality is another key form of self-care for mothers because spirituality obviously is different from religion. But if religion is important to you, and if you're a religious person, then you do have absolutely a form of spirituality in your life. So if that is you, you can ask yourself, it's a good jumping off point, like, is that a form of self-care, like prayer or going to church or whatever it might be, that you think could really support you during this time? And that could be the thing that you do for yourself. Um, but what I mean by spirituality is not necessarily religion, spirituality being your connection to yourself and your connection potentially to something bigger than you. And the reason that this is important for moms is that it's important for everyone. Because it's important to have that feeling of connection and belonging in this world. Once we get to a space of a lack of connection and belonging to the world, to our family, to each other, that's called depression. Sometimes it even manifests as something even more than depression. We get into addiction and so on and so forth. And we try to fill that lack of connection and sense of belonging with other things. So spirituality is important. Connection to self is important for moms because it's important for everyone. And the last S of the 5 S's self-care for moms is slowing down. So that might be connected to saying no or setting a boundary, right? It might have to be, 2 for 1 because you might not be able to slow down unless you take something off your list, right? But it is so important to slow down because of that overexpressed masculine energy that we are all operating on. And one of the ways to take that down a few notches is by intentionally slowing down in life. And again, it goes hand in hand also with creating that space to do so. Slowing down can also, and this is how one way in which it manifested for me, slowing down had a lot to do with releasing perfectionism and or like the need to not only the need to not only implement things perfectly but quickly, and the need to check things off the list, um hyper productivity. All of that puts us in a panic, quite frankly, right? Like a perpetual state of panic. Slow down. Take some deep breaths. The next time you're filling up your water jug at your fridge, close your eyes and take some deep breaths, or see if you can look at yourself in the reflection of the shiny steel in front of you, which I will do at times. Create little pockets of time throughout your day that you can rely on. For example, I will do 5 minutes of yoga on the floor in my kitchen while my coffee brews in the morning. It's a ritual that I have that I can rely on. And a little goes a long way. That is the last thing I'm going to say about this, because again, if you want more, oh, that was my phone. If you want more, I'm going to be offering the Self-Care for Moms recordings, plus the workbook, plus the journal prompts, and a guided meditation. So please reach out or comment if you feel like you want access to that. But the last thing I'm going to say, sort of final thoughts, is a little goes a long way. So once you get into a place where you feel a little bit more connected for yourself, you can do the homework by either asking for support or setting a boundary to create space for you to have a self-care practice. Tell me how it goes. One thing. And that practice does not have to be an hour long or a 45-minute long practice. If you can cultivate, if you can make it happen, that's wonderful. But a little goes a long way. So if all you can swing is asking someone to support you in watching your children for 15 minutes so that you can be alone, then mission accomplished, because a little goes a long way. It will shift everything when you start to prioritize yourself. So I just want to remind everybody to take care of yourself. That self-care is your job. That's why this is the name of the show. It's the name of the game. Self-care is my job. It is my job to talk to you about it and to remind you constantly about this, but it is your job to make this happen in your life. It is not anybody else's job to come in and save you, baby. Just like you're the manager of your job, like the job that you go to or your full-time job, just like you're the manager of your household as a mother in many cases, you are also the manager of your own wellness, which this is a piece of how we actually build a self-care toolbox by integrating self-care into the rest of our responsibilities, because we manage these things and this thing and this thing, but we also manage our own wellness. That is one of our jobs. Remember that. So take care of yourself. And if you're watching this and you want to follow the Self-Care is My Job YouTube channel, pop over to YouTube, search Self-Care is My Job. I would love if you would subscribe to the channel. You can find this within the next couple days. This episode will be uploaded to all the podcast platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. You could follow us over there. I really would appreciate the support. Ask and you shall receive. And everybody, take care of yourself, and we will see you soon.